There is a second carrier group steaming towards the Middle East, which is the second time in 3 years we've had two carrier groups in the hotspot. And we'll talk about what that means with my next guest. Major General Mel Spees, retired United States Marine Corps, been a friend of mine for a long time. General Spees joined me because I had a number of questions about the early Trump moves. Good morning, General. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate your being here.
Absolutely, Hugh. Good morning. Good afternoon, I guess.
It is afternoon out here now. Now, I want to begin with whether or not you were surprised that the president so quickly replaced the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Charles C.Q. Brown, and the CNO, Admiral Lisa Franchetti. Were you surprised that he did that?
Not particularly. He had been, I think, pointing in that direction. So, no, it was really not a surprise.
Do you expect other members of the Chairman Council, the Joint Chiefs, to also go soon?
I'm not sure. I haven't gotten any indications. I haven't read anything anywhere, Hugh, that would indicate there is dissatisfaction with any of the other service chiefs. So I don't think so. I think we would hear something that would point to that if that were in the offing.
Now, if the president were to call you up right now, General Spees, and say, "What do I need in a CNO?" what would you say to him?
Well, the first thing, Hugh, is shipbuilding. We have to have somebody who really understands the problems we have in the failed shipbuilding of the last 3.5 decades and has some idea of what we can do to fix it. And that would really include changing how we do business. Clearly, what we're doing now fails. So we need to have somebody who can talk with real depth about what is broken in the process and what needs to be done to reset the process to deliver better decisions and better program management.
Where do you find candidates for the CNO with that skill set? There are billets for shipbuilders. I knew one. He was a captain. He was in charge of destroyers. He's in the private sector now, and Mark might be listening. But there's really very few billets for shipbuilders. Where do you go and find someone who knows acquisition to be the CNO?
Well, it's not so much acquisition, Hugh. We've got acquisition specialists. It's the decision making that goes along with it. Getting the right requirements, understanding the process of shipbuilding, when the decisions need to be made, how we do the management and oversight, how we can be inside of the decision-making cycle rather than behind the decision-making cycle. So we have people that certainly touch it. We've got admirals who have served inside of Naval Sea Systems and other administrative commands who have understanding. So they exist. They're out in the Navy right now. It's a question of identifying the right one.
Do you have to go down deep? There is a term of art that civilians like me learn late in life called deep select, where you skip over the people who are in line for the job and you go to a 3-star or 2-star. Do you think President Trump would be well served by deep selecting or by staying with the people who've come up through the system?
Well, you can only go so far in deep selection. So whoever you reach down and get is still going to be a part of the system. Skipping a couple of steps runs some risk in the sense that they would likely lack experience at the more senior grades and how the business operates. The key isn't trying to find who somebody might be in their career, it's finding the right person. If we don't have the population right now, then he has to go out and find it. There's no question about it. If we end up with somebody younger, then that's fine too. I'm not so sure that in and of itself is an answer.
Okay, now I want to switch over to recruitment and retention because the president ran often citing our miserable recruitment numbers. Any indication that that's turned around? Do you have a theory as to why it happened and a proposal on how to fix it?
I'm a little cautious of the numbers we're getting right now, Hugh. I'm not quite sure what they mean. If you accept them at face value, maybe some things have turned around. But if you look inside of them, there might be some concern. Now, we've done a couple of things recently the Army and the Navy in particular building prep programs for kids who aren't quite qualified to make it into recruit training to get them ready. I think that's fine. That makes perfect sense. You adapt to the conditions you have. My biggest concern, though, is that once you start doing that, you're under a lot of pressure to get people through those particular pipelines. You're under pressure for the numbers anyway, and you run the risk of lowering standards. And there are some indications that we might be seeing lower standards of people coming in. And one of the ways you can monitor that is by tracking first-term attrition. Are they completing their first enlistment or not? If they're not completing their first enlistment, then clearly you're bringing people in who don't have what it takes to make it through 4, 5, or 6 years.
What is the ideal for the services? Do they want 2 enlistments, 3 enlistments? What do they want from a sailor, soldier, or a Marine or airman?
The services are built a little bit differently. The Marine Corps turns over. We keep a very, very young force, and we're happy with the preponderance of the Marines leaving at the end of 4 years. First enlistment becomes a little bit more difficult with high skill, low density occupational specialties, and we try to retain those through bonuses and things like that. So the services are structured a little bit differently. I think the real key is mid-level management. The E6s, maybe older E5s, and the E7s in the enlisted force, are we getting them with the right years of experience? Are they holding on to the right skill sets that allow them to develop the subordinates below them, keep them motivated, keep them interested, and in many ways retaining them, and then meeting the needs of their bosses up above? We've run through cycles. You can stuff anybody in a uniform. You can pin any sort of rank insignia on them. It's a question of whether or not they're delivering. So I think we really have to look at that mid-level management leadership performance to see how well we're doing.
Now, General, I know you spent some time at the Pentagon, and I can't remember your official titles. You were a poobah in the education system of the United States Marine Corps. How much of the Pentagon civilian force, in your opinion, is superfluous? How much could it be downsized?
Well, I never served in the Pentagon, Hugh. I was pretty fortunate, but I'm familiar with it, and I went there. It's difficult to tell. I think we are probably fat inside the Pentagon. You could throw an estimate out of 10 or 15%. I don't know what savings we get out of that, and certainly we need to trim the headquarters down to the right size. There's no question about that, especially people in the bureaucracy that end up interfering with progress and interfering with moving forward. But I don't know that there's any particular magic inside of that. It really is making sure we restructure the processes that aren't working right now. We get rid of people who aren't contributing to the movement forward. Get rid of things that we've added that don't bring value to the warfighter, for sure.
All right. Let me move to the last subject, which we'll take a break and we'll finish on the other side. Retention of our mid-level officers, our majors, our lieutenant colonels, and our colonels, our lieutenant commanders, and captains. Are we doing a good job keeping the good people in uniform?
I think we've got some issues there, Hugh. Talking to my son, getting a sense of where the flow points are in promotions, time in service, time in grade. I think we are losing a lot of great young men and young women that we would prefer to retain. And yeah, that slows down the promotion process, but it's a balance of experience. So I think we are losing some experienced people that we would prefer to hold on to.
When I come back, I'm going to ask you how we take that cohort, those officers in the senior officer ranks, not general officers, but lieutenant commander to captain and major up to colonel and turn them into strategists, because I've been talking with a number of people, and I'll be talking with Admiral Montgomery about this later today. Are we developing another generation of George Marshalls or not? One of the smartest guys I know is Major General Mel Spees, retired United States Marine Corps. I asked him to join me because of the conversation I had last week with Secretary Rubio, where he said the story of the 21st century will be the story of the relationship between the United States and China. And my conversation with Lord Andrew Roberts about the fact that there were a lot of strategists running around helping FDR and Churchill. Not so sure we've got them now. So, General Spees, first off, how do you define a strategist, a military strategist?
Yeah, I don't know how you find them, Hugh. We really need to be in the business of building them. Finding them tends to be random, and if it's important, then you can't leave those outcomes to randomness. So we need to build them.
And so let's talk about, I know I can point to George Marshall and Sir Alan Brooke and a few other people who are strategists, who are widely regarded as strategists. How do you build a strategist?
The truth is, Hugh, that was done through the professional military education system that had been established inside of the Army, and frankly did a very good job of taking people and equipping them as they progressed through their careers to the next step, giving them the set of skills to do that, but even more so, laying the groundwork so they could think beyond where they happened to be. Right now, our PME tends to be dominated by building planners. We've consumed ourselves with building planners, operational planners, campaign planners, and we're not getting people set to think and work at a much higher level until pretty late in their career.
You used the term PME. I'm not sure what that meant, General.
Yeah, I apologize. Professional military education.
Okay,
That's
so
the business I was in to a large degree.
So when did the change happen, or did it happen so incrementally as to not to be noticed, to go from building strategists to building planners of a variety of sorts?
Yeah, I think it happened over time, and then certainly these last 25 years, the demands of cycling through war put a lot of pressure on us, making sure the officers that we're sending out to the units, in particular those who are getting ready to deploy, the headquarters that are deploying and managing the tactical units, were proficient at that. And that has dominated us for really a long time, many decades. And we really don't start getting people thinking at a higher level or working to a higher level, as I mentioned, until too late. And you're not typically going to get to those assignments unless you get to the combatant command or you're working at the service headquarters in the Pentagon. And we don't really tailor people into those positions very well.
What kind of assignments are we talking about, General? Is there an office marked grand strategy, come in here and think?
Nope. I think really the assignments end up at those higher headquarters. When you get into the J5 directorate, the J3 directorate, and certainly J4 logistics and assessments and things like that, because they're dealing at the much higher level. They're dealing with bigger areas, they're dealing with bigger problems. They're looking for longer term effects in the things that the services are doing inside of the theaters. Actually ends up being a pretty small population of people that end up doing that. And it only happens maybe once or twice in a career as you're working your way up through the grade of colonel. So I think doing a better job of identifying, sending people to those places, and then tailoring the professional military education they go through to meet those needs.
How much time do you think the Chinese People's Liberation Army spends developing strategists? Or do they leave that to the party?
I don't know. I'm completely unfamiliar with that, Hugh. Um, the Russians certainly did a lot of work, in particular, very senior officers. I assume the Chinese are doing the same thing, especially if they keep their senior leaders in positions for a long time. Then you have a chance to get some really good return on the investment. We move people through assignments pretty quickly, so the ability to have influence and impact becomes very limited in that regard as well. So I think there's a linkage, not just how we move people about, how long we keep them in positions in order to try to build the long-term continuity that can give us the opportunity to put together strategies and see them play out effectively over time.
Last question, General. The Chinese assessment of their military came out last week. Our assessment of the Chinese military, I want to be clear for the audience, came out. It's enormous. They got the largest fleet in the world, et cetera, et cetera. When you look at what they're building, what do you infer from what they're building?
I, they're building the kind of military, Hugh, that you would expect of a nation that is growing its economy and influence around the world. What they're doing with their Navy is not unexpected. It's the same thing we do in the sense that we want to make sure we can protect the lifelines of our prosperity, of our economy, so we have the ability to get out and reach. And they are certainly doing that. That isn't a surprise. And I don't want to get in the peaceful rise, are we trying to contain them? But it's an understanding of what they're doing. So they're building a very large military that can take care of the expansive influence that they're growing throughout the world.
Is our response to what they're doing appropriate, or is it too little, too late?
I think it's too little, too late. We have got to make tremendous transformations in shipbuilding and the defense industrial base. We're absolutely way behind. And I am really suspect that we are just anchoring ourselves on, well, our sailors are better, our ships are better, everything is going to be fine. I'm not so sure that that works. And we're getting at a point where there is far too much risk. We can't be in a position right now where we can assure ourselves of a satisfactory outcome. And you don't want to be in that kind of spot. We've got a lot of work to do to make sure any potential collision with them, it's for sure that we're going to come out on top. And we're not there.
No, we're not. General Mel Spees, retired United States Marine Corps. Thank you very much, Major General. Great to have you. Always good to see you. Thank you for spending time with me. I'm coming right back. America, don't go anywhere. 1-800-520-1234. There's lots going on today. I've got Haviv Reddy-Gur coming up, Senator Cotton coming up as well. But I would set the table. We're behind. We're behind. Be aware. I have a date with Haviv Reddy-Gur next hour, in which we dive into the chaos that is Israel right now as our second carrier group is steaming towards the Persian Gulf. We'll keep you up to speed on that. I have a new sponsor, Chapter Medicare. And Chapter Medicare promises to help anyone who is joining Medicare or switching their Medicare plan. Because there are 24,000 Medicare plans. There's Medicare Part A, Part B, Part D, Part G. And there's a whole lot of variety depending on whether you want to be in Advantage or in Supplemental. It's a mess. It's very, very complicated. So when I was contacted by Ari at Chapter, would I want to possibly take on a new sponsor, I did my due diligence and said, okay, this is big data coming to meet Medicare and make sense of it. But you still don't know till you try it. And my friend Carl tried it over the weekend and he wrote me an email. We spent well over an hour with Melanie Blank. She took down lots of details about our medical history and meds. She was not only knowledgeable, but had a good sense of humor, too. She ended up putting me in a Cigna plan, which greatly reduced copays and prescription costs and lowered costs for emergency hospitals quite a bit. The plan she found for my wife is Blue Cross of Texas. similar savings, but she wasn't legally able to write the policy. So she sent a link to Doreen and talked her through the application, and it was all squared away in a matter of minutes. I hope there's some financial reward for her efforts there. I can't tell you how comfortable and easy it was, and I will recommend Chapter and her specifically to many neighbors and church friends who are of a certain age. That would be 65. Thank you for finding them and sharing the news with us. I'm very glad when I find a sponsor that can deliver. When I find a sponsor like Chapter Medicare that can do things for people, that they write me notes and say, hey, they saved me money and they did it and they're polite and they're fast. I'll tell you about it. If you are turning 65 or you have a parent who's turning 65 or you've had a life event that allows you to change medical coverage, all you have to do is go to your phone, hit pound 250, pound 250, or as they say, hashtag 250. An operator will answer and you say Chapter Medicare. That's it. They'll take it from there. Pound 250, Chapter Medicare. Also want to thank everyone. This weekend, I got lots of well wishes. Was I feeling better? Yes, I am. I'm going to take my relief factor right now because I deserve it. I did 6 on Friday, 6 on Saturday, 4 on Sunday, and I took this morning off because I'm getting a little bit of shin splinty stuff. But I took my relief factor every day. I'm taking it right now because I'm in the relief factor studio. And I think that all of you out there who hear me every day on the air take it, realize I try and get my miles in, and I was laid low for 3 weeks with the bug, and I'm better now, and got to get those miles back. That means doing more than 20 a week or 25 a week, but I'm not going to do it all in 1 week. I'm no dummy, and it still means 6 days out of 7 or 5 days out of 7 that you ought to be going up and down the Implacable Hill. So I did the Implacable Hill 3 times out of 4, and it's great, and it works. Relief Factor works. Call 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief, 1-800-4-RELIEF. If you want to get started with a starter pack, $19.95, less than $1 a day, and then you'll thank me. ReliefFactor.com. Go and find it. Donald Trump at a cabinet meeting earlier today, cut number 1.
I think it won't be that long before the states will be really running the Department of Education. Our teachers are going to be taken very well care of. And I said, personally, I don't care, union, non-union, it doesn't matter. Teachers are so important to this country and to me. And we're going to take great care of our teachers. And I know it's very important to Linda. Yes. So I think you're going to see a tremendous change very quickly having to do with education. And the process has already begun, very strongly begun.
The president also spoke about the border, cut number 2.
Yesterday, I was speaking to somebody, I was checking on the border. And they said there was literally nobody in this massive plaza. We're talking a plaza that would hold hundreds of thousands of people. There was literally nobody there. There was one person sweeping it, but there were no people. It's been amazing. It's been an amazing transformation very quickly. And we're getting the bad ones out first, and we're taking them out. And there's some really bad ones, murderers of more than one people, at least 50% murdered more than one person. This is the people that we're letting in through their open border policy. It was terrible, but I want to just congratulate you and Tom Holman on the job you've done. It's really.
Boston this weekend, hundreds of dangerous criminals were removed, 4 killers taken out of the country just by what they did in Boston this last few days.
And these are killers that there's no reasoning. It's not like, let's talk them out of it. These are stone cold killers. They don't care. They don't even think about it. They kill somebody. They go to sleep. They wake up. They don't even remember they killed them. These are bad people that should have never been allowed.
I think the president is winning on this issue. Olivia Beavers is with the Wall Street Journal. She joins me once a week. Olivia, I have the same question every week, and I have a column for Fox News coming out tomorrow on this. When are the House and the Senate and the president going to sit down and hammer out the budget and the reconciliation?
Well, there was actually a meeting today, and I was just, before I came up to do this hit with you, waiting with a group of other reporters to catch Mike Johnson, the speaker, coming back from his meeting with Thune, where they're expected to be talking about reconciliation, debt ceiling, and all the good, fun legislative pushes that Republicans are trying to get through. They have a pretty ambitious schedule that they have put out publicly, and there's definitely some questions about whether they're going to reach that. They were hoping to basically have some sort of compromise between the House and the Senate by Easter, and I still think that they're pretty far apart. So the Senate wants far less spending cuts than the House has proposed. There is both sides are pushing for money for military and defense, but they have to really kind of work together on tax policy and a few other things that are slowing down this push to essentially fund the Trump administration's ability to get his agenda in place with the border, with defense, with energy. And so I don't exactly have a perfect answer for you. They're working on it, but
Well, what's different between this week and last week is that the Federal Reserve came out with new numbers which showed a slowing growth to 1.7% GDP and inflation down a little bit, but not where it needs to be. In other words, the markets are just kind of churning around waiting for news, and the news is in that bill. Is there any sense of urgency among the people that you speak with that they've got to get something done?
if you ask them, I think every Republican will say that there is urgency in getting it done. But I've been in this building long enough where even if they say there's urgency, that doesn't mean that they pull back from what they think is an important fight. And the House GOP leadership put out a statement today basically saying that they think the Senate should just take up their bill because they believe that, they pushed it through such narrow margins and they think that that should be the path. It wasn't particularly well received by the Senate side. And so those talks continue. And I think that that's what you see with government is that they move a little bit slower than the White House and everyone would really like.
What doesn't the Senate like in the House bill? What's the trouble with it? It's like arguing with a marshmallow. You can't get a grip on what the argument's about because no one will tell you anything. And meanwhile, the clock is ticking down.
I think that there's some issues with the House bill includes cuts to non-discretionary spending that the Senate just doesn't seem to be wanting to take in that much that they're moving for. It was cuts to non-discretionary, boosting military, and the Senate version that they seem to be pushing forward has a difference in that. And so I think that that's where you're seeing some hang up. That's how Speaker Johnson was able to get conservatives on board, in addition to the pressure of the president. But the talk of the cuts, even though that they're still kind of going with the same baseline for funding in the previous fiscal year, there are cuts being made and money being reallocated in places that the Republicans would prefer.
What non-discretionary funds are we talking about? Medicaid?
Well, if we're talking about the budget resolution, there's definitely a chance in the way that the top line numbers have been sort of structured that there would possibly have to be cuts to Medicaid. Now, Republicans say Medicaid is not mentioned anywhere in the blueprint resolution, but the way that the numbers work out, Republicans also probably tell me they don't see a way in which Medicaid is not cut. The Trump administration says they don't want to touch that, and a lot of Republicans, like you and I have talked about, there's several centrists who are like, please don't do that. That's going to really impact people back in our district, including, the speaker has not said this, but Speaker Johnson even has a huge Medicaid constituency in his district.
Well, this is where I'm really confused. A Medicaid constituency doesn't really exist. It's free health care. It's provided to the indigent and people below the poverty line, sometimes 150% above the poverty line. They usually get their treatment at emergency rooms and clinics, and they're not charged when they are. The Medicaid is actually not an entitlement in the way that, say, Medicare is an entitlement where you get a Medicare card and you give it. Medicaid is not that. I don't understand why it's in the same category.
It just is in their mind, I guess, and that's how it's been shared with me. If they start touching that area, it's going to be very hard on the back end for certain Republicans to support it. And Trump said he didn't want to touch it except for with exceptions. Getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, and making sure that people who are not here in the country legally are not on the system and stuff like that. There are certain contours that they're okay with, but the way that it's being structured at least out of the House initially, would lead to some cuts in funding.
So, Olivia Beavers, to wrap this up, we don't know anything different this week. You're going to be back next week. Do you think we're going to know anything different next week?
Well, we're going to try to get answers from Republican leadership this week. They were out last week with recess. Now we're in this 3-week stretch where they're basically going to be trying to get a bunch of things done. It's going to be a little hectic, and addressing debt ceiling, addressing the reconciling of the reconciliation, and so hopefully we have answers because we want them just as much as you do.
Well, good luck with you on that. I'm very frustrated by the fact that we don't have a scorecard, we don't have a playbook, we don't have a calendar, we got nothing, but we got Olivia Beavers, and we're glad that we do. Follow her on X at Olivia_Beavers. Follow me if you will to Job Creators Network. They have stood up an important website, all right, Job Creators Network. All I want you to do is head to their opportunity to come to the Job Creators Summit. That's jcn2025summit.com. jcn2025summit.com. Use the promo code Salem, by the way, promo code Salem. It will be in Savannah, Georgia. I'm going. A bunch of other people are going. You'll see Mike Gallagher there, Stephen Moore, Kellyanne Conway, Governors Youngkin, Kemp, and Reynolds. Lots of people talking policy, wonky stuff in beautiful Savannah, Georgia on May 1st and 2nd. If you want to sign up for that, you have to go to jcn2025summit.com. That's jcn2025summit.com. Come along and have some fun. Use the promo code Salem, please, at jcn2025summit.com. Promo code Salem. I spent a lot of the weekend grumbling about Foote v. Ludlow School Committee. Now, on my weekend big pod, I previewed this. I'm going to be talking about it all week long. I want to use this moment to introduce you to it. It is a decision of the First Circuit Court of Appeals of the United States Federal Courts. So it's a very high court, right? Just below the Supreme Court. The First Circuit covers New England. And so they take appeals from district courts in Massachusetts and in Maine and Vermont and all those places up there, Connecticut, maybe Connecticut Second Circuit, I'm not sure. The Federalist Society does not take positions on cases, but they did publish a brief on this. Here's the quick story. Last week, the First Circuit in Foote, F-O-O-T-E, versus Ludlow School Committee became the first federal court of appeals to step into the substantive terrain that its sister courts have so far avoided, the substantive terrain of gender fluidity. Unfortunately, in a per curiam decision, the tone of which was jarringly colloquial for an issue of this magnitude, the judges stubbed their collective toe. That is a nice way of saying it is a miserably written decision. It's not colloquial, it's stupid, it's bad writing, but I digress. Foote involved parents who clearly had standing. They wrote to their school explaining that their middle school daughter was under professional care for her gender confusion and instructing that no one at the school should communicate with her about the subject. Nonetheless, a few months later, their daughter told school officials that she considered herself genderqueer and that she wanted to use another name and not only feminine pronouns. She also said she didn't want her parents to know. The school stepped right up and honored the daughter's requests instead of those of her parents. One teacher stumbled by letting slip to the parents that their daughter was being called by a different name at school. The parents again repeated their direction to the school principal and superintendent, but the school continued down the gender transitioning path with the child. The school officials refused to talk about the matter with the parents. The First Circuit admitted that the Supreme Court has repeatedly recognized parents' rights and responsibility to direct the care, upbringing, and education of their children as a liberty interest protected by the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. And that includes the right to make decisions about mental health treatment. But the First Circuit found the right was of no avail to the Foote parents. The court reasoned that the schools take over for the parents when their children are on school grounds and that school authorities can substitute their own judgment for that of the parents, even when they do that on a campus and it has repercussions at home. The First Circuit admitted the parents may direct medical care. The First Circuit admitted that the parents may direct the upbringing of their children. The First Circuit admit that schools shouldn't lie to parents. But the First Circuit smoothed all this over by finding that nobody at the school forced the young lady to announce that she was genderqueer. They just gave her information. Listen, I'm not going to let this go. This is an assault on every parent in every state of the union. An attempt by the federal courts to say that public schools are in charge of your children, not you. And that they can hide things about your children from you, despite your explicit direction that they not do so. This isn't about gender fluidity. This is about the state taking over your children, and we're not going to let it go. We're going to keep talking about it here on The Hugh Hewitt Show. I'm beginning this hour with our friend Haviv Rettigur. Haviv is the Times of Israel correspondent, the Ask Haviv Anything podcaster, and my go-to guy for figuring out what the heck is going on in Israel. Over the weekend, I read every source that I could and was amazed at what was happening in Israel. So I asked Danielle to please get a hold of Aviv, and he's here. Thank you, Aviv, for answering on short notice.
Thanks for having me, Hugh.
Would you begin by laying out to people what the Supreme Court did, or actually what Prime Minister Netanyahu and his cabinet proposed to do vis-a-vis Shin Bet, and you had Ronen Bar, and you may want to explain what Shin Bet is.
Yeah, the Shabak, or the Shin Bet, is the internal domestic security intelligence service. It's roughly parallel to the FBI, although it does also have near abroad kind of elements. It was supposed to, for example, track Hamas in Gaza. So it extends beyond. But its basic job is to protect Israel against spies, organized crime, things like that. So it's one of the intelligence services of the state, alongside the Mossad, alongside a couple of others. And Ronen Bar is the head of the Shabak, and he was the head of the Shabak on October 7, and so he is also responsible in large part for the failure of October 7. He's one of the main people responsible for that failure. And over the last couple of days, we've seen the Israeli government, Prime Minister Netanyahu, make public a demand to fire him, and explain to the public in videos that argue that there's actually a conspiracy by Shabak head Ronen Bar to depose him. And Netanyahu has started using the word deep state, borrowing it from the Trump administration, borrowing it from the United States discourse. And so that's all happened in the last week.
So when did Barr take up his duties? Because if I'm correct, he did so under the prior government, led jointly by Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, both of whom are enemies of Netanyahu.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, he's been in the he I believe took his in 2021. He came to office in 2021. I don't know of any opposition to him from Netanyahu or from anyone around Netanyahu. There are a lot of things happening here all at once. One is the claim from Netanyahu that there's a conspiracy. He has a specific argument. It's Netanyahu's response to the claim that, in fact, Netanyahu, from the left, that Netanyahu is engaging in a conspiracy to dump all the fault of October 7 on other people and get them fired. And so there's this back and forth where each side is claiming that the other one is conspiring against Israeli democracy, against them, etc. So Ronen Bar is someone who worked closely with Netanyahu, who had there was no tension that we knew of before October 7. Since October 7, you can't get away from the politics of it. I mean, I'm happy to lay out Netanyahu's case, but Netanyahu has systematically gone through and fired people and made the claim that he's the only one in power not responsible for October 7. And so there's definitely, even if there is an actual conspiracy exactly the way Netanyahu is arguing, this is still a very seriously political moment, and Netanyahu is relating to it in very political terms.
Now, there's also a second actor that's sort of an independent actor, your Attorney General. Now, I'm not well-versed in Israeli law, and I know you haven't got a written constitution, you have the basic law, and the basic law provides for this position of Attorney General. But she has struck me for the last 2.5 years as pretty publicity-driven and very anti-Netanyahu, and I guess she's a holdover from the previous government as well?
Let me take a step back. Let me try and lay out the government's case here, because the government's case, I think, is not stupid. It is serious. It is not merely politics. The Israeli government, the cabinet, the politicians are arguing that Israel's attorney general is, in fact, unusually powerful. It's an extraordinarily powerful position. It is both the legal advisor to the government and also the head of the state prosecution, which means that it both offers legal advice to ministers and also indicts the ministers. Right? This is the same person. That's a conflict of interest. It's a very powerful position also because about 30 years ago, the Israeli Supreme Court ruled that if the attorney general tells the government something is illegal, then it's illegal, and the government has to abide by the attorney general's ruling. In other words, that, for example, if the government disagrees with the attorney general and wants to go to the High Court of Justice against the attorney general, limiting the government from taking some action, the attorney general doesn't have to represent the government's opinion, right? Because this official legal advisor of the government was turned into by a Supreme Court decision in a famous case called Deri Pinchasi 30 years ago, a separate kind of judicial oversight of the government. And so I know that sounds crazy, especially in the English-speaking world. We have possibly among the most powerful attorneys general in the world. And over the last 2 years, ever since the judicial reform was announced in January 2023, by the justice minister of this government and backed and supported by Netanyahu, and it became something that really set Israel's streets on fire, and half the country was convinced it's the end of democracy. And ever since then, the attorney general, I think, has come to see herself as the child holding the finger in the dike, preventing the flood. And so there's been a lot of this headbutting between the government and the attorney general. The government is allowed to fire the attorney general by law. The government is allowed to fire the head of the Shabak by law. But if the head of the Shabak is right this moment, literally in February, began investigating multiple members of Netanyahu's closest circle, aides in his office, for receiving money from Qatar, the great funder and supporter of Hamas, his firing might look like an attempt to subvert justice. And if she is defending the country from very radical demolition of as the left claims, right? The radical demolition of the Supreme Court's power to balance executive power, then it's a war on democracy. And so the big question really is, what does everybody intend? The right is arguing that the law is on its side, that the court and the attorney general have this runaway power unequaled anywhere in the world. And the left is arguing that the government is trying to demolish any check on its power of any kind. The sad part is that both of them have a lot of data points in their favor, and it's become a debate that's so utterly politicized that this really fundamental and crucial question that Israel has to decide about its constitutional order and its future as a democracy is being handled by the lowest imaginable politics and lack of leadership.
Now, I dove in by listening to Amanda Dan and David Horowitz talk for 35 minutes about this. And at the end of it, all I could conclude is that, and I don't know that it's fair, I hope it is, that both Amanda and David don't like Netanyahu, so they're siding with Ron Bar and the Attorney General. And that, to me, is an echo of American politics where everything became, where do you stand on Trump, and then I'll tell you what I believe about everything else. In other words, Netanyahu has so polarized the country that we can't get an objective GPS on anything. So, Aviv, if you were going to explain to an American audience right now, do you have a constitutional order or don't you? Because it seems to me you only have a parliamentary system, Netanyahu won, and all these other people are just standing in his way of prosecuting a war.
Okay, so let's leave the prosecuting a war question to the side. I don't think there's anything standing in his way of prosecuting a war except himself. But the war, I have a separate critique of Netanyahu. Let's just tackle the constitutional question and really take a step back. Israel is a parliamentary system, meaning the people elect a parliament, the parliament elects the cabinet, the government, the executive branch. That's true of Britain and Australia and Austria. And The one difference with Israel is that we have almost no checks on that cabinet that other systems have. So, for example, Britain has direct election of MPs. So an MP who's popular in their district can say no to a prime minister from their party, right? So that's a check. The direct election of MP is a popular check on a prime minister's power. Israel doesn't have that. When Israelis go to vote, they only vote for a party list. And the entire country is a single constituency that votes for these lists. And who actually puts a person on the list of a particular party? In almost every case, it's the party leader. In most parties, there are no primaries at all. They don't even pretend. The center-left Yesh Atid, the Russian majority Israel Beitenu, the religious parties, they don't even pretend to have a primary. Likud has a primary, but Netanyahu's influence is so enormous in the party that functionally it isn't really a primary. And so, and again, Likud is the best of them. In other words, everyone else is worse. And so,
All right, let's pause it there. I will be back with Haviv Reddy-Gur later in the program. I've already posted the entire interview, which I taped right before the program began today. If you want to go and find it, it's at my YouTube channel. Just Google Hugh Hewitt and YouTube. I'd like it if you liked and subscribed. It's about a 40-minute conversation because I really had to get to the bottom of it. This book, 7 Things You Can't Say About China, is by United States Senator Tom Cotton. It reached number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list, which was something of a surprise. It continues to sell and sell. If you have not yet purchased 7 Things You Can't Say About China, you ought to. Senator Cotton joins me now. Senator, are you surprised by the success of your book?
Well, Hugh, I was very sold so many copies, and I know it must have pained the editors at the New York Times to acknowledge it was the best-selling book in America the week it was announced. But I do think it reflects a deep appetite among the American people to learn more about the threat posed by communist China. As I say in the book, China is justly unpopular with the vast majority of Americans, and most of those Americans are very worried about China. But if anything, it's actually much worse. The threat is pervasive. It's present today. It's not remote in the future. And it is something that affects your everyday life in America, not just, something that might affect our strategic position in the world years from now.
When I talk to guests, I bring up the gray zone activities. China keeps flooding the waters around Taiwan with enormous ships, lots of overflights, lots of threatening gestures as a means of softening them up. Is that all it is, Senator, or do you think they might actually pull the go gun?
I don't think we can ever take that for granted, Hugh. I know that Taiwan, and for that matter, Japan, does not either. That's why the increasing number of recent years of naval and air patrols by Communist China in Taiwan's airspace and its waters, just like in Japan's Southwest Islands, are so deeply troubling. It gives the People Liberation Army's Air Force and Navy more opportunities to train for the operation in which they might go for the jugular in Taiwan. It puts severe stress on Taiwan and Japan's military, both their equipment and their people. In times when you might be, say, doing operations or maintenance or training, or just giving your troops a break, they have to scramble to intercept those Chinese aircraft and ships. And I think it also can't help but to lead to a bit of a sense of complacency and dull the acuity of the antennae of everyone who's involved. If it's the 2000th time that China enters into Taiwan airspace and nothing happens, or on the 2001st time, maybe that's not a training exercise. Maybe that's actually the initial attack force. So I think that we have serious reason to be very concerned about all of these incursions.
Senator Rubio was my guest last week, now Secretary Rubio, and he said the story of the 21st century will be the story of the U.S.-China relationship. I'm sure you agree with that, but do you think the administration is prepared to roll out to increase our deterrence at max speed?
I do agree with what Marco Rubio said last week. It's really the first time, Hugh, that in the history of mankind that China and the United States have been strong together. China, for most of history, was the world's dominant superpower. We don't think about it in those terms because travel and communication was so limited. But until about 200 years ago, there's little question that China was the world's dominant power in terms of population, and wealth and material power. That was overpassed eventually because of technological advances in Europe, and China entered what it still calls its century of humiliation about 200 years ago, which coincided with America's long rise to be the most dominant power in the history of mankind. And then China has returned in the last 30 or 40 years. So that, as I say, it's really the first time in human history that both China and the United States have been strong at the same time. And that's why the Trump administration, like I, are very, very focused on trying to rebuild deterrence as promptly as possible. Some of that is political, but some of it is material and military as well. I think a successful China policy 4 years from now would be Donald Trump handing the reins to the next guy without having had any conflict over Taiwan, with the peaceful status quo remaining in place, and with our military and Taiwan's military being much stronger and much more capable of deterring or, if necessary, winning that conflict in the future.
Yeah, we can only hope. Now, I had Major General Mel Spees on to open the program, retired United States Marine Corps. I asked him if we're producing strategists equipped to deal with China. And he was not dismissive of the idea, but downplayed that we are actually building strategists. Do you think we are?
To some extent, Hugh. I mean, I think there's a lot of people that appreciate the risk that China poses. It is, as I said, somewhat of a novel situation, and I don't think, you can draw easy historic analogies. Sometimes, people talk about Thucydides' trap with China and the United States. I think that is misplaced in some regard. Or they talk about Richard Nixon going to China and splitting it off from the Soviet Union. As you recall, Hugh, that split had already substantially occurred.
Yep.
I mean, there had been exchanges of fire across the Russian and Chinese border, and Mao once fled Beijing because he thought Russia might nuke him. So Nixon and Kissinger were recognizing the reality of what had already happened and trying to turn it to America's advantage. But there's no doubt there are many people that recognize China is the most serious threat we face, and they are taking steps to try to counteract that threat.
Does the budget and reconciliation package that you've seen, whether it's Lindsey Graham's or the one that came over from the House, does it take the kind of steps you want to see to keep the gap open between us and the People's Liberation Army and People's Liberation Army Navy?
Well, at this point, Hugh, it's still kind of broad brushes. The budget speaks in very broad categories. Only the legislation that implements that budget actually gets down to the fine details of, say, what kind of munitions we're going to buy or what kind of ships we're going to build. Right now, on that front, I prefer the Senate bill to the House bill. We allocated $150 billion to that kind of investment. The House did $100 billion. Of course, either one would be much, much better than Joe Biden's woeful budgets. But we'll see where things shake out. I'm confident that whatever budget reconciliation bill we pass is going to take the steps necessary to help our military get ready to counteract the China threat.
A last question, Senator. For the first quarter, everyone told me that budget reconciliation package, one bill or two bill, you would have a plan and you would have an agreement by Easter. That does not seem to me realistic.
Well, Hugh, I want to say that I was not part of everybody. I suspected it might take longer than many people were predicting. I mean, that's one reason why the Senate wanted to pass a budget that focused on the border, on defense, and on energy production, because we know the tax code can be very hard. It's painstaking to reform. It implicates a lot of interest, and those are not always just partisan. Those can be regional as well. But whatever we end up passing, 1, 2, or 10 bills, I'm confident that it's going to do what's necessary to keep taxes low for working Americans, to get our economy growing, to keep prices stable, to produce more American energy, secure our border, and, as we've been discussing, to rebuild our military to confront the threat of communist China.
I hope you're right, Senator, but I sure wish you guys would move faster. Thank you for joining me. Follow him on X at @SendTomCotton. Go out and get this book, 7 Things You Can't Say About China. A very surprising bestseller, #1 on the New York Times list. I did not see that coming. 7 Things You Can't Say About China in bookstores now. Please also remember, over at the top of HughHewitt.com, Feed the Poor. Food for the Poor is running its annual Lenten campaign. Hundreds of you stepped up over the weekend. Thank you. $5, $50, $100 feeds a child for an entire year. All you have to do is find the banner at the top of HughHewitt.com, Feed Their Future, or text my name, Hewitt, to 51555. That's Hewitt to 51555, or go to the HughHewitt.com website and find the banner, Feed Their Future, at the top. As always, I have sponsors on the Hugh Hewitt Show. One of them is myphdweightloss.com, 864
644.
1900.
That's 864
644
1900.
I just wanted to pause there for dramatic effect. I would like to know if this past weekend in
Yes.
March Madness, do they give you a March Madness guide for myphdweightloss.com?
No, but there are certainly protein-friendly snacks that you can consume during March Madness.
I also read a story this weekend about the remarkable man who lost all the weight with the drugs and has kept it off without the drugs. And apparently, he's very unique.
That doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, it's very unusual for people who lose the weight using the new drugs to keep the weight off after they stop taking the drugs. We would like you to lose weight. We would like you to lose weight the old-fashioned scientific way, and with a counselor, as Dwayne did, lost 50 pounds over 2.5 years ago, and he's kept it off for that period of time at 864
644.
1900. Visit myphdweightloss.com. Let me also, if I can, since I've got a couple of minutes here, play for you some Michael Waltz yesterday with Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation, cut number 14.
Well, we've taken out key Houthi leadership, including their head missileer. We've hit their headquarters. We've hit communications nodes, weapons factories, and even some of their over-the-water drone production facilities. Just in the last couple of days, President Trump has decided to hit the Houthis and hit them hard, as opposed to in the last administration where literally weeks or months would go by with these kind of one-off pinprick attacks. And as a result, we've had one of the world's most critical sea lanes get shut down. I mean, these guys are like Al-Qaeda or ISIS with advanced cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and some of the most sophisticated air defenses, all provided by Iran. Just so everybody understands the impact here, the last time one of our destroyers went through the straits there, it was attacked 23 times. 75% of our U.S. flagged shipping now has to go around the southern coast of Africa rather than going through the Suez Canal. And keeping the sea lanes open, keeping trade and commerce open is a fundamental aspect of our national security. The last administration was not effective. The Trump administration and President Trump have decided to do something much harder, much tougher, and what we'll see, but I think will be much more effective.
I'm very, very glad. I'm very, very glad that we are sending a second carrier there, and the Houthis are going to find out, screw around, find out. Meanwhile, we had Lee Zeldin, who is the administrator at the EPA, make an announcement at the cabinet meeting today, cut number 7.
EPA has now canceled over $22 billion worth of contracts, $2 billion going to this NGO that Stacey Abrams was tied to. They received only $100 in 2023. And then the Biden administration gave them $2 billion. The director of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund saw his former employer get $5 billion. So $20 billion went to just 8 NGOs, and they're all pass-throughs. And then they were giving it to other entities. Many of them were pass-throughs. And what you have is all these extra middlemen, they're taking their cut. And the taxpayer ends up getting screwed. They're losing out on all this hard-earned money. They can't afford to have the federal government waste. The partnership with Doge and Elon Musk has been incredible at EPA. Their team is very talented. We wouldn't have been able to do it without them. And of course, this mandate from President Trump to make sure that we identify every last penny, whether we're saving $50,000, $5 million, or $22 billion. We will not rest until every last penny is saved. Thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity to do this for the American public.
And we have Vice President Vance speaking up at the cabinet meeting, cut number 4.
If you think about what happened with the Abraham Accords, one of the great diplomatic breakthroughs under the first Trump administration, really in the last 30 or 40 years of American history in the Middle East, and the Biden administration did absolutely nothing with it. Built on it, not at all, added 0 additional countries. Purely out of political spite, the Biden administration, I think, hurt the United States and really hurt the project of world peace. That has changed. Luckily, about 2 months ago, we got a new president, and that president has given us the task of building out the Abraham Accords, adding new countries to it, And really what you see is a lot of these countries that have historical ethnic or religious hatreds want to build. They want to build new artificial intelligence. They want to build new real estate projects. They want their citizens to become rich and prosperous and peaceful, and they're setting to the side some of those old hatreds under the leadership of President Trump. So,
and we've got a group that is
progress
helping
and
El
keep on-
Salvador build. That's Food for the Poor. It is Lent. A $100 contribution to Food for the Poor, which you can make at hughhewitt.com. Will feed one child in El Salvador for a year. You can also call 855-359-4673. 855-359-4673. Or simply go to hughhewitt.com and click on the banner, Feed Their Future. Please be as generous as possible. It's Lent. You still have a chance to get in on the Lenten penitential observation. The easiest way is to support Food for the Poor. If you're like me, you listen to Getting Hammered, the podcast hosted by Mary Catherine Ham, co-hosted by my guest, Vic Mattis, who is the Washington Free Beacon weekend editor. Hello, Vic. How are you?
I'm doing great, Hugh. How are you?
I'm good, but I have to investigate deeply something that came up on the most recent edition of Getting Hammered. There seemed to have been an allegation made that one Matt Continetti participated in pub crawls. Now, that's going to shock a lot of my listeners because Matt is usually with us most Fridays for the Weekend Review, and he is the most sober and steady of old hands. It must be a different Matt Continetti.
Well, we were all younger at the time there, Hugh. We're talking about, 2005, 2006. We were all kids. Well, he was a kid. I was middle-aged at the time. And I'm sure Matt will deny that ever happened. And then I'll be told never to mention it ever again. But it was
I
all
heard
very
that
safe,
loud and
good
clear.
fun.
I
It was
heard
not a mess.
pub crawl and Matt Continetti, and I thought, I wonder what they were doing at the Weekly Standard back in those days. All right, let's talk about Tesla terrorism and virtue signaling. You and Mary Catherine Ham had a very, very, I think, enlightening conversation about the people who cannot bring themselves to say it's terrorism to blow up Teslas. How deep is the poison in our system?
Well, it's so bad that they don't realize that they're doing it essentially to themselves, because electric vehicles, of course, this is the most important thing to them. This is the bread and butter, one of their key policy issues for the left. And of course, the biggest company in the country right now pushing for this is Tesla. Everybody was having a Tesla. Everybody loved Elon Musk. Now his opinions change, and suddenly, because the opinions change, they're now torching these Teslas, the dealerships, the charging stations. Everything about it is bad. There are people out on the streets, I can imagine, and people have been interviewed, where they're terrified about having something happen to their car, regardless of who they voted for. So, yeah, they've clearly lost their minds on this because of, again, it's about the policy. It's not the positions. The principles haven't changed.
Are we giving too much attention to it? Because right now it's 3 different terrorists. They've all been arrested. They're all facing very long times in jail. One in Washington State, one in Savannah, Georgia, one in Colorado, if I recall correctly. Are we making much ado about nothing? Jimmy Kimmel aside, Jimmy Kimmel is a moron. But Jimmy Kimmel aside, are we making too much out of this?
No, I think this is a big deal because there's this feeling and this vibe, at least in part of the country, that this sort of behavior is acceptable because Elon Musk, quote, had it coming. Wouldn't you do this because of what he's been saying? And it's totally understandable. When in fact, the response should be no, because we're adults. And we don't react this way by having these insane tantrums and blowing things up. It's kind of the same dark, disturbing reaction to Luigi Mangione, who the suspect in the murder of the United Healthcare executive. And people were cheering that on, like on the audience in Saturday Night Live. It's a disturbing thing. I think it's good that we're bringing a lot of attention to that because it shouldn't be tolerated.
Do you know Eli Lake by chance?
Yeah, of course.
Well, Eli's got a brand new podcast out, which I'm looking for the name of it right now. It's called Breaking History. And in Breaking History this week, he compares the Baader-Meinhof game to Luigi Mangione, and that there's this strain of bourgeois radicalism and bourgeois violence that reappears every now and then. And we haven't seen it for a long time in the United States, but we're seeing it again. And the last time we saw it was like the Red Army Brigades and the Baader-Meinhof gang and that kind. We don't want to go back there.
That's right. No, that's right. You're reminding me of like the Red Army faction killing German bank executives in the 1970s. And even in this country, there was that element, of course, with Patty Hearst in the Symbionese Liberation Army and what was happening to her, and in her mind that she was doing something that was cool because they're taking it to the man. We have to draw a line. And it's, again, this kind of thing is unacceptable, and it's disturbing that there are obviously parts of this segments of the society who think this is a cool thing, but it's not. And you cannot say just because somebody gets denied coverage for a medical condition or something, which is could be very unfortunate and very difficult for that person, that it justifies the outright murder of an executive. And again, I think he lies right about that. Going back to Baader Meinhof.
I listened to the two podcasts, Getting Hammered and Breaking History, back to back, and it was unusual. You were both talking about the same thing, talking about domestic terrorism after a period of long quiescence where we really didn't worry about that. We had lots of demonstrations and Code Pink and people yelling, but violence was verboten until last spring and the rise of the Hamas adjacent demonstrators on campuses. All right, now let me ask you about Colombia, Vic. They're begging the Department of Justice to slap them on the wrist. They've offered to ban masks. They said they'll hire 36 more policemen. What would your penalty be on Colombia? Because they obviously violated Title VI. So did Harvard. So did UCLA. So did Michigan. They all are naked and afraid in the jungle because they can basically have anything hammered on them.
That's correct. I would say nothing less than full accountability for their actions dating back to October 8, shall we say, when things started to change, obviously, on campus and everyone started to come out. First of all, cheering on the massacre of October 7, and then justifying it, and then being full on outright supporting Hamas, not even really Hamas adjacent. I like that they're finally, better late than never, telling these kids, if you want to protest, you want to take a stand, you got to take that mask off, or if you need it for other reasons like health, have your student ID on you, but don't be a coward about this and protest and be, want to be pretend terrorist like you're a kid. That's a good step. It's funny because Colombia has a multi-billion-dollar endowment, but they are still in need of those hundreds of millions of dollars that come from the federal government. And
I would bring the hammer down so hard. I had Leo Terrell on last week. I would bring it. Now, let me ask you, in South Jersey, did they ever have a desegregation order in place there where a court would take over a school district?
Not that I recall, Hugh. That goes way back in my time. And I grew up in the 80s, 70s and 80s. So, it wasn't like, that was an issue at all in New Jersey.
They still had them in L.A. and Boston in the 70s and the 80s. I'm looking for that kind of consent decree from justice. I really want them to take over Colombia and root it out, branch and root. Vic Mattis, follow him on X at Victorino Mattis. Listen to him on Getting Hammered. We didn't even get to your sartorial choices, Vic. I had my notes on your sartorial choices, but too much to do in one segment. But just before the program today, I talked with Aviv Redigur from Israel. Let's resume a bit of that conversation.
What that means is, just to take all of that Greek and turn it into a simple point, is that Israelis elect parties that elect a cabinet. The people sitting in government, in the cabinet, the executive branch, the ministers of that government, led by the prime minister, have literally personally appointed the parliamentary majority. So functionally in Israel, unlike in other parliamentary democracies, the executive and legislative are almost the same. They're literally the same people, appointed by the same people. They are functionally one unit. And that is why, in the Israeli context, the Supreme Court has grown so immensely powerful. And it has, for lawyers in the crowd, unlimited standing, almost unlimited justiciability. The court will deal with any issue. The court will respond to any, it hears 5,000 petitions against different government actions a year. The Supreme Court of Israel, not lower courts, not little functional courts. And so we have this immensely powerful court, but almost no other checks and balances in our system. There's no second house of parliament. There's nothing. And that's the problem. So the Israeli political right says this court has become unbelievably powerful. For example, our Supreme Court has a functional veto power on appointments to itself. There's a 9-member committee that appoints judges. It has representatives of the parliament and the cabinet, and it has representatives of the court. And the 3 members of the court have enough votes to veto an election to the court, because you need 7 out of the 9. And those 3 members of the court have never voted apart in hundreds and hundreds of votes on judges.
Wow.
So the court can veto appointments to itself. Anyone can have standing, and it will tackle almost any issue, including literally battles in mid-battle. I mean, it is a massively powerful court. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, and I'm sorry for going on for so long, but just to catch everyone up on 75 years of Israeli law, constitutional law, the right is absolutely correct that we have a ridiculously and unhealthily powerful court.
All
And
right,
the
stop it
left-
right there. I'll come back. I'll play more of Aviv next hour. The entire interview is posted at my YouTube channel already. I talked to him for about 40 minutes. It's posted at Hugh Hewitt YouTube. I would encourage you. I think Aviv is a wise, wise man. Mel Spees, who opened the show today.
Hugh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me, and I'll let Mel know that you said hello. He's a good man.
What? Yeah, he's listening right now. He did a great job talking about all this. Tell me, Congressman, how's your first couple of months been under the dome?
You know, I'll tell you what, it is an amazing time to be up here in Washington, D.C. There's no question about it. This is a unique time. Not very often do we get to have unity of government and the courts. It's pretty remarkable what we're able to do with that advantage. And as you know, this is a majority-led institution up here. It definitely pays to be in the majority.
Now, I know you're a Green Beret, and so I know you're going to be looking out for the Army. But are you on Armed Services? Did you get that pole position on Armed Services?
I am on Armed Services, yes.
All right. So here's the tough question. It seems to me that we're going to have to rearrange our priorities at the Pentagon and shrink the Army and expand the Navy. Yay or nay, Congressman Harrigan?
I would say no, but I will tell you that I am diving into all of our services. I have all of the plaques of the services up on the wall right up here to my right. And when the Navy came in, I did play in the Navy by the Village People when they presented their plaque. Look, I think there's no joking around. We have a lot of work to do specifically with our Navy. I am very sure that Mel talked about that earlier in the show because he and I talk about it all the time. And it's been fascinating learning about it. As you know, I come from the defense industrial base, so I know a little bit about manufacturing things. And we've got to put a lot of institutional effort in making sure that we have, number one, the right ships to build, and number two, can build the ships.
Yeah, the first thing I asked him was, the president relieved the CNO as his right, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs as is his right. Who ought he to put in the CNO's job? And General Spees said, somebody who knows a lot about shipbuilding. And that seems obvious to me, but I'm not sure that there are a lot of people in the building who know a lot about shipbuilding. Do you think there are?
Yeah, I think that is a fair point, both from Mel and from you. Look, we have a very robust respect for our military men and women, particularly our senior leaders who've been doing it for an entire career. And I like to joke with Mel all the time. It's like, look, Mel, everybody likes to give generals respect, but the reality is we don't have a general in the inventory at DOD that's won a conflict on behalf of the United States of America.
Huh.
And so you have to take a step back and take a very sober look at where we are in order to address and best define the course of where we need to go.
Now, Congressman, I made a rookie's mistake. I've been doing this since 1990, so there's really no excuse for me. I didn't really introduce you. Would you tell people where you're from and what you've done before you ended up being Freshman of the Year on the Hugh Hewitt Show?
Yes. So I'm from the 10th District of North Carolina, which is kind of central western North Carolina, a little bit above Charlotte, up in Mooresville, all the way up to Winston-Salem. I live in Hickory, North Carolina with my family. I am a defense manufacturer, got into firearms and ammunition manufacturing after I got out of the military. As you said, I was in the Special Forces, Green Beret. Prior to that, I came out of West Point, have done a couple tours to Afghanistan, and so have been in the military, have served alongside of it, have served in the industrial base, and have a pretty well-rounded understanding of where we are, where we need to go. And I ran for Congress because of President Joe Biden's absolutely criminal withdrawal out of Afghanistan that I believe condemned the next generation of Americans to conflict, and I want to do something about that.
Now, Congressman, I don't often speak about my weapons expertise. Would you tell us what kind of weapons you designed on the private sector?
Yeah, we handle kind of anything underneath the small arms umbrella. And so we are heavy duty into the M4 AR-15 platform. We are also into many different variants of semi-automatic handguns. And we produce a lot of parts that ultimately end up on larger firearms companies' production lines that go into their guns. So we do a little bit of everything.
All right, now, Congressman, are you following from your perch on armed services the buildup that the Chinese People's Liberation Army and People's Liberation Army Navy are undergoing? Because it's massive and it can't be missed, but we are missing it.
Yes, I'm following it very closely. And I think there's no question that China poses the greatest strategic risk to United States security, sovereignty, and influence around the globe. And certainly to a degree that we've never seen in our lifetimes another near-peer adversary quite like China. And so they are absolutely a fixation of our focus up here, and making sure that we can deter a potential conflict with China, and if we can't deter it, that we can win it.
Now, let's talk and finish. I talked with Mel about this as well, recruiting. You obviously turned in the papers at an early age. At 17, you applied to join the Long Gray Line. So someone put that into your head. I don't know if you come from a military family, whatever. Other people join. Do you think we're fixing the recruitment crisis? Because it's a real crisis, and America's young men and women don't want to serve in the numbers that they previously did.
Yes, I think we are fixing that recruitment crisis. And part of being young and wanting to serve your country and join the military and potentially put your life on the line in order to serve America's values and interests, serve your fellow Americans, it all revolves around what type of leadership you have, right? I mean, leadership ultimately is everything. It's always everything. And the quality of American leadership is directly proportional to the number of folks that we're going to have sign on the dotted line to potentially put their life in danger for this great nation and for freedom around the world. And I think that with President Trump in office, the new regime that we have over the Department of Defense that is prioritizing war fighting and the warrior mindset, which, let's be honest, Hugh, that's what you need in order to win. These guys want to win. There is no substitute for victory, as General Douglas MacArthur said. That is the new culture of DoD. That is going to get people into our military because people like to be on a winning team. They do not want to sign up for something or an organization that they think is going to lose, or that they're going to be handcuffed, have their hands tied behind their backs as they're taking bullets to their front. That is not the case anymore in our Department of Defense.
Congressman Harrigan, what year were you at West Point?
I graduated in 2009.
Oh my God, you are a child. And so you're going to, I'm curious, as you look forward, you're 30 years younger than I am. So as you look forward to serving a long time on the Hill, do you have a long-term objective? I mean, the short-term objective is to find where the bathroom is, get to the committee assignment, read your briefings, hire staff. But do you have a long-term objective?
Look, I don't know how long I'm going to be up here, but I would like to accomplish two things. Number one, don't fight wars that we shouldn't fight. Number two, absolutely win the ones that we do. And we are very far from achieving those two outcomes right now. And if I can have even a little bit of influence, even as a freshman, and I'm trying to have an outsized influence as a freshman with that just because of my background and experience and actual knowledge of the defense industrial base, what it takes to manufacture things, and really the thought process of what we actually need in order to win. I will consider my time up here a success. And if I can in some way, shape, or form take what I had thought was inevitable after the fall of Afghanistan, which is the next generation of Americans is condemned to conflict. And if I can keep them out of conflict, this will be an unbelievable successful time for me in my life up here, and a time well spent.
That's a great answer. Now, a lighthearted answer. What's the most surprising thing from your first 2 months on Capitol Hill? Is it bad parking? Is it good food in the cafeteria? What is it?
I'm actually going to give you a serious answer. It is the fact that Doge has been able to do so much in such a little time. And as we all look at what Doge is doing, I think the question that people are going to ask is, well, if they were able to do this in 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, and have truly a transformational impact on our federal government, what have my representatives who've been up here for 6 years, 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years been doing? they have not really been providing oversight or the leadership that they need. They've been part of the problem. And so we've got to work through that as an institution up here. That's actually been really surprising to me. I think I'm learning a lot about committee structure and how things work up here. That's obviously not necessarily moving the ball in the best direction for the country. So I'm evaluating very carefully how I spend my time.
Congressman Pat Harrigan, thank you so much for joining me. You happen to be my in-laws, Congressman, so we're going to keep a close eye on you from the Winston-Salem outpost of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Thank you, Congressman. I want to remind everyone over at HughHewitt.com, there is a banner. It says Feed Their Future. That's because it's Lent. That's because during Lent, I partner with Food for the Poor, which has been feeding the hungry of Central America for more than 40 years. They are at work in Salvador every day. A $100 contribution feeds one child for an entire year. It's that cost effective. They are that good at what they do. All you have to go is to HughHewitt.com and find the banner at the very top, Feed Their Future, or you can call them as well at 855-359-4673, 855-359-4673. Bethany Mandel is my guest. She is, of course, Moms at War Substack author and regular guest on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Follow her on X at Bethany Shondock. Bethany, I've been waiting a week to talk to you. Have you heard of the lawsuit Foote versus Ludlow School Committee?
Perhaps. Give me a hint.
I'll give you a couple of clues. 11-year-old girl tells her teacher that she's feeling attracted to other girls. Teacher calls the parents. Parents say, thank you very much. We'll handle this. We'll get counseling. There are some other sketchy aspects of what the school does, but the parents send everybody in the school district. They send every teacher. We got this. Thank you very much for your concern. We're taking care of this. It turns out that the school enters into a conspiracy with the 11-year-old to change her name at school so that she can be gender fluid at school and to conceal this from the parents. And they continue to do so after the parents find out about it. The parents sue. Their lawsuit is dismissed. And the First Circuit, in an astonishing decision last month, sided with the school district saying, hey, you turn your kid over to the school, it's up to the school to decide. What do you think of that?
So I've spoken when I wrote Stolen Youth, came out 2 years ago, but it's as relevant now as it was 2 years ago. This was a conversation that I had with a lot of parents that they had to prove harm before they could have any success possibilities in the legal field. And it's such a frustrating thing because they had to let the school district hurt their child before they ever had a case. I'm not surprised, and I think that parents, especially parents who send their children to public school, need to know this, that they think that, look at what Randy Weingarten said last week when the Department of Education, that whole executive order that was signed, she held up a sign that said, hands off our kids. Randy Weingarten does not have children. She thinks that my children are her children. And thank God I have a firewall of protection because my children are not going to public schools. But for every other parent who sends their children to public schools, I don't care where you live, this is the paradigm. They think that your children are theirs. And the legal system
what is so shocking to me is that the First Circuit is a serious court. It's a circuit court of appeals. It covers Massachusetts and Maine and Vermont. It's up north. And the judges, two of them are Biden judges with a total of less than 5 years experience. One's an Obama judge. It's a horribly written opinion. As a writer, you would just be shocked at how badly written it is. It is both condescending and obtuse. But the idea that they blow past, this is settled law. Parents control the education of their children. It's settled law for 100 years. There is no way they got this right. And I'm just kind of shocked that people don't know about it. I think it's because it happened on February 17th. But I also think the First Circuit's just basically giving the middle finger to Donald Trump. I really do think it's a political case.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So the Supreme Court is hearing a case from my county here in Montgomery County, Maryland, in almost exactly a month on April 22nd. And I'll be there covering it for the Free Press. But basically here in Montgomery County, the county decided that parents could not opt their children out of very sexually charged books that start at the age of kindergarten age. So 5 years old, kids are reading books that have topics in them that I don't think I can, according to FCC rules, talk about. But if you look up Pride Puppy and the glossary in the back, you can sort of see what I'm talking about. And so the school district decided that parents weren't allowed to opt their children out of that material. And that decision is going all the way now to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is going to decide, do parents have the right to opt their children out of, material that violates their religious beliefs? The majority of the parents who filed this lawsuit are religious Muslims.
Well, I've got to say, I will be astonished if the Supreme Court does not rule for the parents, because when I say settled law, the Pierce case, the Meyer case, they are 100-year-old precedents where parents run their kids until parents abuse their kids, in which case the state steps in. The schools have never had standing to overrule a parent. And I'm curious, why the fanaticism? I mean, who is pushing this in the public schools? Where are they coming from?
Because they're not having children, so they're indoctrinating ours. That's the whole premise of all of this and what I wrote Stolen Youth about. They're not having children. They're all antinatalists. So how is their ideology going to go through the next several generations? It's only by capturing our children.
Do you know that 25 years ago, these people would have gone to jail? These people would have gone to jail for concealing a mental condition from the parents. And now they're being celebrated by the First Circuit. I believe that this has got the potential to fundamentally alter the politics of America, because parents are pretty protective of their children. Do you agree with me about that?
Just a little bit. I mean, what's scary about this, and it's the slippery slope argument that really disturbs me when it comes to this stuff, because if a child at the age of 11 is having these feelings regarding their sexuality, regarding all these things, there's a not insignificant chance that that child is actually being abused sexually. And they're warning flags. And instead of the school district being in communication with the parents and giving them the full picture, they're hiding aspects. And so that leaves a child more vulnerable to abuse, because they've decided that their ideology trumps a child's safety.
I hadn't thought about that. And I don't know anything about the field, so I'm not going to comment on it. But the one thing, I'm just a lawyer, and I teach con law. Parents control their children until they forfeit the right to control their children by physical or mental abuse. And then we lean over backwards to get them back their children, because we have a great belief in the bond between parent and child. I don't know when schools went rogue. Was it during COVID?
I mean, that was a lot of it. I mean, they decided, it was this weird sort of dichotomy. They decided that what they were doing was not essential, and then they sort of just hit the gas full speed, foot as flat as they could on the gas, because they saw their grip on America's children slipping. They saw American parents' trust slipping in the education system, and teachers unions, and the whole system. And I think that they decided to put a death grip on the American education system.
Quick exit question. Haviv Redigur is coming up after the break. I talked to him before the show about the stability or instability in Israel. Are you concerned about what's going on in Israel?
Yes, very.
And
yeah, the level of disunity is unlike anything I remember seeing in my lifetime paying attention to these issues.
So how does that play out? Why doesn't the Attorney General quit? She's not doing any good. Why doesn't the head of Shin Bet quit? Netanyahu won the election. I'm not a Netanyahu fan, but he won.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know an Israeli that loves him right now. I mean, but I also, who is the alternative? I don't know. But I think that Israelis are really between a rock and a hard place and just absolutely exhausted of this war. I mean, the fact that, I have friends who were out to dinner last night and then they had to run into a shelter because there was yet another Houthi missile. It's just exhausting. They're going back from, the reserves back into Gaza, and we're over a year and a half into this, and there's just no end in sight. And I think there's a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, but there doesn't seem to be a plan.
No, there doesn't. I will be back with Haviv Redigur for more of my conversation with him. All of it is posted at my YouTube channel, and you can follow Bethany Mandel over at X at Bethany Shondark and Moms at War Substack, and of course her book Stolen Youth. Earlier today, I was joined by Haviv Redigur of the Times of Israel from Jerusalem to talk about the absolute upheavals underway in the Jewish state. Let's return to that conversation.
Is absolutely justified in feeling that the attempt to weaken the court is an attempt to take over anything, because there's just no other check in the actual system, except, of course, elections. But elections are, a long time apart. And in the meantime, you can do a lot of damage if there's no real check between parliament and government, etc. So
that would put a premium.
That
That would put a premium on the Supreme Court acting prudently. In other words, as the United States Supreme Court often has, they punt and they don't get involved. They don't like political cases. They don't want to get in the middle of controversy. Sometimes they're obliged to, as in Bush v. Gore and occasional cases having to do with the executive and the Congress. But they generally don't want to get in the middle of them. They're typically called non-justiciable political questions. The Supreme Court, as I see it from America, the Israeli Supreme Court, seems eager to get in the middle of all this and to always flick the nose of the conservatives who clearly represent the majority of the country.
Yes. First of all, yes. Second of all, no. And I'll tell you why no. In January 2023, Justice Minister Yariv Levin, Netanyahu's justice minister, presented the reform the government was proposing. And the reform of the court was so utterly extreme and radical that what it ended up doing was actually not saying to the court, hey, the government should have more say. The elected officials should have more say in appointing judges, which is totally reasonable. Not telling the court, there should be limits to justiciability or to standing, but actually saying we can completely ignore the court. No matter what you say, we just literally can ignore it. For example, one of the elements of his reform was what they called the 61 vote override. Anything the Supreme Court says, 61 votes in the Knesset can override. Now that's 61 votes out of 120 is the lowest possible majority, which in a parliamentary system, by definition, a coalition government has. And so the government was literally in this reform gutting the court completely. The tragedy of this moment, and the reason that I feel deeply alienated from both right and left, is that what we need is a weaker court and many more checks elsewhere in the system. But we don't have a responsible right. It's correct on its critique of the court, largely. Most of the right is correct. We don't have a responsible right to do that. And you know how you see this playing out? When Yariv Levin proposed his reform, and it's still echoing now, we're seeing another battle in that great war. When he proposed the reform, there was 70% support among the public for judicial reform. A month and a half later, that had fallen to 25%. So the Israeli political right is correct, and most of the public thinks it's correct, and is so radicalized and so irresponsible that most of the Israeli public was convinced by the left, saying they're actually just trampling everything and undermining and destroying everything. The Israeli right is refusing, alongside the absolutely correct weakening of the court, to come in and say, hey, we need new institutions, more checks, but not in an unelected court. And so everyone here is irresponsible, and we don't have the leadership to get this done. And it's a real tragedy.
More coming up with Aviv Reddig Gore. All of it is already posted at my YouTube channel. I know that he has quite an international audience, and you get a chance to sit down with him for 35, 40 minutes. I wanted to make sure, and Harley put it up. It's already over at my YouTube channel. I would like you to like and subscribe to that as well, and we will put it in the podcast today as well. Let me check markets, because American Federal is my great sponsor. My team, led by Nick Grovich and his wonderful group of professionals, they buy and sell precious metals, and they do it from 1-800-221-7694. 1-800-221-7694. You want to buy gold? They'll sell you gold. You want to sell gold? They will buy your gold. Same for silver, same for platinum. That's what they do. They make a commission. So if you are buying gold today, right now gold is at $3,017 an ounce. You're not going to pay $3,017 an ounce. What you pay will depend upon how much you buy, but that's the spot market, and Nick works off of the spot market. You need to talk to him and his team at 1-800-221-7694. What about the rest of the market today? The Dow was up 1.42%. The S&P was up 1.76%. The NASDAQ was up 2.27%. So everybody's happy. Gold was down a little bit at 3,017, but just because it goes down a little bit doesn't mean you should depart from your plan. If you buy gold every April 1st or every tax day, whatever it is, keep doing it wherever the gold is, dollar cost averaging. And do it with Nick. 800-221-7694. Or go to AmericanFederal.com, AmericanFederal.com. I'm joined now by Admiral Mark Montgomery, retired United States Navy. Hello, Admiral. How are you?
Good afternoon, Hugh. How are you?
I'm good. I began the program with retired General Mel Spees, Major General in the Marine Corps, and I asked him, okay, the president decided to mix it up at the Joint Chiefs, and he wants to find a new CNO, and that's his right. What should he be looking for in a CNO, Admiral Montgomery?
You know, I think that you want a CNO that's really requirements driven right now for two reasons. One, we actually have to source a war plan, right? I know we sometimes say, you know, our mutual friend Jerry Henderson will say, we need a Navy strategy. I think we need a defense strategy and then a Navy strategic plan to execute what the COCOM says they need for the defense strategy. In other words, the Navy doesn't have an independent strategy. They have a strategic plan to properly service the combatant commanders in executing the President and Secretary of Defense's strategies. So first of all, you need to have somebody who understands requirements and can get that done. The second part, and that's important because that's, you know, what weapon system could substitute for something. You know, sometimes a COCOM wants missile X. What about missile Y? The second part that you need in a CNO is someone who can tackle this shipbuilding problem. Look, the Secretary of the Navy is coming in pretty fresh, doesn't have a lot of naval experience. I think Secretary Phelan is going to lean heavily on the CNO to be that person that's a truth teller about what the companies are telling him, the yards are telling him, and the shipyard commanding officers are telling him. And that's going to take some tough talk from a CNO. So those two skill sets, requirements and shipbuilding, I think are the key in the next CNO.
You know, I knew a shipbuilder, retired captain now, and there aren't that many billets for people who build ships. Do we have shipbuilders in the Navy? Are there enough people to put their hands up and say, or at least be considered by the president, to be a CNO of a ship of an expanding Navy?
So I think it's not going to be someone who comes from, you know, a purely acquisition naval or an engineering duty officer, Naval Sea Systems Command. We do have 1 and 2 stars that do develop that skill. But he could look at a very senior acquisition professional, someone who was both commanded a ship, but then later in their career shifted over into the acquisition end of it. That could be, you know, I would not recommend doing that routinely with the Chief of Naval Operations. But if you say to yourself, our shipbuilding project is, you know, behind on every ship that we're building by a total of, you know, 11 to 16 years, you know, collectively, then you might say, I think you got to make the number one thing the number one thing. And at some point, that's shipbuilding. Now, look, you got to be careful with this because you need someone who understands the aviation aspects, so, you know, some of the other aspects, the special operations aspects of the Navy. So I would not go down an engineering duty path, but I might consider someone with some acquisition background for this job. But again, I think that's a one-time or two-time only thing.
Now, I also asked General Spees the question, which I put to you. How do we make strategists in the way that Field Marshal Alan Brooke showed up in time for Churchill and George Marshall showed up in time for FDR? Do we have a plan to produce people like that vis-a-vis China for the next 50 years?
No, we get them ad hoc. So you get people like Admiral Stavridis, who uniquely, you know, through his own efforts to get different degrees and programs, created himself, right? And those are infrequent. There have been a few of them. We actually got rid of the program that produced them. It sent them to Tufts to get PhDs, and then, you know, kind of watched them over their careers. But that program since ended. We don't work too hard at this. Look, I grew up in a Navy that didn't value going to the War College, for example, and the War College was critical to developing the officers, the naval counterparts to the you know, the Brooks and the Marshalls. You know, it produced. He's a son of a bitch, but, you know, Admiral King and Admiral Leahy.
Everything I've read about Admiral King is just, you're absolutely right. That's what he was.
Yeah. my grandfather trained him at flight school to get his pseudo wings that he got as a captain. And I would say my grandfather didn't say bad things about too many people, except some of the Japanese he fought and Admiral King. So I would just say that. But so how do we get them? We get them because we need to reemphasize our war college. The Army treats the Army War College like a rite of passage. The Navy treats the Navy War College like something you're trying to pass around, right? We have got to embrace that more. I think if we're going to develop strategists, look, that's to make everyone a little smarter, but to cull the people out. I think you watch the graduates of that. You see what people write there, how they think there, and then you cull a few out and give them another opportunity to strategic process a few years later in their career after their next major milestone. And if you do that, I think.
Big question. The Pacific's so doggone big, and Americans are not used to thinking about Malaysia and Indonesia and the Philippines, et cetera. Does the Navy force feed that into its officers?
No. In fact, I'll tell you, in the surface warfare community, the first port off the board is Rota, right, in Spain. I promise. My son.
That's in Spain. We got to tell people
Spain,
in Pittsburgh that's in Spain. Yeah.
So my son got Yokosuka, the prime warfighting port in Japan, and he told me it was on the board, so to speak, till about 70% of the way through the class. So I'll just say, Rota off the board in the first 3 or 4%. Japan, Spain, where there's not, it's not where we're at, top 3%. Japan, where it's at, we're taking you down to 70%. So I'll just say, we're not quite there yet.
So how do you change that culture? We have a minute. I mean, what do we do? If we have a conflict in the next 50 years, that's a big one. It's going to be with China, right? So shouldn't we start studying China?
Yeah, I think there's things we can do to prioritize the work at the War College. I think they're starting to do that. Look, I think there is a. I think Sam Paparo does a great job pushing the Pacific, thinking about the war plans. Sam Paparo being the Indo-PACOM commander. So I think we're doing a little bit more of it. But look, if you're asking me how do we make it more strategic, that's an actual process that will take a few years and more investment by the Navy in long-term strategic thinking.
I hope they are working on it as of tonight. Admiral Mark Montgomery, thank you. Always a pleasure to see you. Follow him on X. He is a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. On X, he's at Mark C. Montgomery. Earlier today, I talked with Haviv Redigur from Israel. Let's rejoin that conversation for a couple of minutes. It's posted at YouTube, of course. There's a war. And so I'm wondering, do you think the Supreme Court will back off and allow the dismissal of the head of the Shin Bet and the dismissal of the Attorney General, if only to turn the page and move forward to try and finish the war and get the hostages out and bring about a new order in the Middle East? Because it seems to me they are displaying a massive indifference to the circumstances on the ground right now.
I think Ronen Bar has to go. I think he has to go. And I think turning him leaving into a political fight serves Netanyahu's need to have an excuse for him not to go. In other words, I am someone who believes that everyone in charge that day. I happen to think Likud's front bench is actually a group of remarkable people. And Netanyahu is not the only leader Israel could possibly have. And everyone was responsible for October 7. His basic theory of containing and deterring Hamas for 15 years is what exploded in our faces on October 7. The military chief lasted way too long, a year and a half. The head of Southern Command of the IDF, the general most closely, the theater commander responsible for October 7, then fought a war in Gaza with all of that guilt on his head. I don't understand how any of that happened. So I think Ronen Bar has to go. He doesn't have to go because of this political game of chicken with Netanyahu. He has to go because of October 7. But Netanyahu needs another reason to fire him so that people don't say, hey, if October 7 is a fireable offense, why doesn't that apply to Netanyahu himself? And so, there's such an important constitutional question at stake here. And I'm not against the right on this, on the fundamental points, but it has behaved in ways that are so utterly irresponsible and dangerous and silly that they've undermined their own case time and again. And just look at the fact that judicial reform never advanced. It never actually.
It didn't advance. And I would encourage all of you to go and watch the rest of my interview. I don't think there's a better analyst of Israel in Israel than Aviv Redig Gur. And I would recommend the entire 40 minutes. It's over at my YouTube channel. While you're there, I would like you to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our interviews. Also, you can get Highly Concentrated Hugh. It will be on the podcast today. Don't forget Dwayne's World Podcast. And don't forget Relief Factor. I'm in the Relief Factor studio. I remind you about it every hour. Sometimes I remind you late in the day because some of you are going out, you're walking down the steps right now, and your knees are barking at you because you've been sitting down all day. Look, if you took Relief Factor, that wouldn't be the case. Maybe. It works. 7 out of 10 people who start to take it keep taking it forever, like me. I've taken it for, I guess, a dozen years because I don't like minor aches and pains. I had some this weekend after a 3-week layoff, and I did 6, 6, and 4. Had a little bit of shin splints. They're gone today. And I credit Relief Factor. I carry in curcumin with Veritron Omega. Call 1-800, the number 4 and the word relief. 1-800, number 4 and the word relief. Or go to their website and find the starter pack for $19.95 at relieffactor.com. Please also don't forget, over at HughHewitt.com, Feed Their Future. Our campaign is underway to feed the children of El Salvador. $100 feeds a child for a year. If you heard it, it was meant for you. Go to HughHewitt.com and click the banner.